Ready for this.
Sweet. You want to jump in?
Let's do it.
Are we going to get in the pool? Are we ready?
We can get in the pool. I'm not much of a swim. I mean, I can swim. I'm just not much of a, maybe I am a water person. I like boats and shit.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I've never been a strong swimmer myself. I always wanted to be that. I'm not much of a
go to a pool and swim kind of person though. Like if I'm on a beach or like in a natural body of water, that's when I usually jump in. But a pool?
Yeah.
I don't know. I haven't been in a pool probably since I was a teenager.
Wow. Okay, that's a long time. Yeah, I mean, living in Texas, I think it's a lot more common. People hang out at pools because it's hot, but geez, yeah, that is a long time.
I just avoid people in gatherings, and there's usually people in gatherings around pools, and I don't own a pool myself, so I don't get in pools.
Hey, that adds up. All right.
It does. So how are we going to start this?
I guess we let's jump in. Let's hit the script and get rolling.
Do it.
Yeah.
Do it. Get us
started. The League
of Game
Philosophers.
Unscripted.
Unedited.
Video game podcast.
For you.
To enjoy if you so desire.
Yes.
We're not going to make you, nor can we, because you can just turn us off.
That's right. One little click of the Billy Bomb and
of the Billy Bomb. Is that what it's called? The Billy Bomb?
I've been watching a lot of Adventure Time. And they use so much like silly words, like they'll be like bum biscuits, and like and they're always like really just like elementary, simple, silly words.
Yeah.
But I love them, and every time I start watching that show again, they all get stuck in my head.
I've never given Adventure Time much of my time, so maybe I should.
So legit good.
It's on HBO Max, I think, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. There's like 12 seasons of it. And it's an interesting show because it started out as like kind of a show, just, kind of like that young teen 12-year-old kind of boy audience-ish. Sure. And then as the show got older, because it's been around for like a decade now, right. The storylines and the characters all got older. So by the time you're watching the later seasons, you're like seeing Finn dealing with like his father issues and his own like breakups and like coming around and having like personal growth and whatnot, as well as like super interesting like artsy angles that they go. Like sometimes they have some really psychedelic, strange, cool, philosophic episodes and whatnot. And they're all super bite-sized at just like 12 minutes each. So it's really easy just to, consume it like popcorn.
Sure. All right. Yeah, maybe I'll try that.
Super good show. And then that guy, Pendleton Ward, that made that show, he came out with another show called Bravest Warriors. That was even shorter. They're like 6-minute segments, and they're all on YouTube.
I think I've heard of that one.
And it's like kind of like a sci-fi take on Adventure Time, but like everybody has to deal with like their own like internal senses of courage. And sometimes that means like being vulnerable or apologizing and whatnot, but still ridiculously strange and awesome. Like you might have this like heartfelt moment, and during that you have one of the other characters that's struggling with the nightmarish simulation mode of his friend that's just called Butter Lettuce. And it's where it's like a VR unicorn male stripper zone that he has to navigate and whatnot. It's wonderfully strange. Yeah, I'm a big fan of that guy.
Right on. Yeah, that sounds cool. I'll have to definitely give it a shot.
Yeah.
So here's one thing I have to tell you about that's completely not video game or even media related.
Sure, suck it to me.
But it was great, and it's Pride Month, so I thought I'd share this. So Ryan and I, Ryan's my partner, everybody. Ryan and I went to the Outlet Mall recently, yesterday, and we went into the Banana Republic store because we're both like pretty slim, petite kind of guys, so a lot of their stuff fits us pretty well. And you can get some really good deals at the Outlet. So we go in there and we both had a bunch of like clothes to try on. We both go into the dressing room, and you could tell that one of the guys that was manning the dressing room was also queer.
Yeah.
Of some way. I overheard something he was saying, but anyway, so we both go into the same dressing room, And we didn't think anything of it because, we're going to there to try on some clothes. We're not doing anything nasty. We can do that at the house.
Yeah.
So, so we get back out. We're still looking around the store, and that same guy comes up to us, and he starts laughing, and he goes, "Guys, I have to tell you something really funny that happened when you guys were in the dressing room." And we're like, "What on earth?" And he said, "There was this lady that came up to me, and she goes, 'You know that there's two men in the same dressing room.'" And he was like, "Yeah, they're allowed to be in there."
But you don't understand. They're both men together.
And I was like, what a perfect story for Pride Month, right?
Yeah.
I just thought that was funny. I thought you and anyone else listening might get a kick out of that. There are still little old women in a Banana Republic store going, "There's two men in the dressing room."
God forbid.
Yeah, good. We got a good laugh out of that.
Nice. Yeah, I'm excited to tell Raz about that. That'll make her laugh.
God. I mean, my God, if you got like someone there to critique what you're wearing, might as well.
Yeah, dude, Raz goes in with me in dressing rooms all the time.
Yeah,
like because she just knows how to like pick clothes and has that intuitive sense. So she always comes in and is just like adjusting everything and looking at things and whatnot.
Yeah,
totally normal. And I'm sure that woman probably wouldn't even think twice if a guy and his girlfriend went in there. Yeah. But two boys, call the police.
And why would you say that to the store clerk?
Yeah. Like, what is he going to do? He's going to pull the alarm. Like,
oh, that was amazing.
Oh, anyway, that is pretty funny.
Retro games. So what have you been playing recently?
I've been playing a totally different kind of retro game.
Yeah.
I've been playing freaking Magic the Gathering.
And Ryan is all into Magic the Gathering, the Commander variant.
Yeah, so I used to play this like back in the day when I was like 13 years old. When I first moved to Cincinnati, we could ride our bikes to this comic shop, and the middle of the shop just had like rows of cards, and you could just like flit through them all. And I had a friend that like was kind of into the game, but we didn't really know what we were doing. He was just like, "Wow, you just need some land and you need some monsters and spells and just pick out stuff." And I got like pretty into it. It was actually the first card game that I ever played that was like a deck building kind of game. And for anybody that's never played one of those, they can be really neat to set up. Like the building the deck quality is really quite fun. Like because it plays like a bit of chess with a bit of poker because it has that uncertainty. But then like what you're setting up with your strategies is like a Rube Goldberg machine. Yeah. And when you go off, you can almost see the marble rolling and hitting something else as it triggers something else. And it's so much fun to build these little mechanisms and like, lean them on other people and see how they deal with them and whatnot. But it had been forever since I played Magic, and like I didn't want to buy a bunch of cards and stuff, like because I don't play with anybody in person. Right. And I actually reached out to Ryan, and I was just like, "Hey, you're still into like collectible card games? Like, what do you suggest getting into?" And he's like, "Well, you could try out Hearthstone, and there's like a new Riot Games made one called Runeterra that in typical Riot fashion is just a copy of Hearthstone." Right. And then and he's like, "But they have Magic Arena, which is like their new fancy one with all the animations, which I'm sure you've seen him playing." Yep. So I've been just doing all the free-to-play stuff, not spending a dime, just building free-to-play decks. Yeah, and just enjoying it. But it like has sent me down this little path. Well, all of a sudden, while I'm stretching or something, I'm watching like YouTube videos over like the history of Magic and all the artwork and stuff. Because that's what like really sets it apart. Like I like the gameplay itself is just nice and clean and mechanical without getting in its way. And all of the artwork totally reminds me of like 1990s like fantasy fiction, like browsing the shelves at Borders. Like it all has that high fantasy art quality to it.
Yoshitaka Amano did a couple cards.
Oh, he did?
Yeah, you have to look him up.
Oh my gosh, yeah, I must look that up.
Yeah, they're cool.
But I love all the artwork. It's just a neat, cool kind of sleeker style than compared to the more cartoony Hearthstone and stuff like that. And I've just been totally getting into it. And I just got a new phone recently, so like this gives me something to like play on my
Oh,
phone.
cool. Okay.
Yeah, while I'm like waiting around on anything.
Yeah.
So yeah, in a funny way, this old, kind of retro game, although it's a living game,
Sure.
is still around. So I'm like revisiting it and seeing all the new stuff on that.
Nice.
Yeah, that's kind of been the big one. I've been like chilling out on like the first person shooting stuff. I just kind of got a little, I guess, burnt out on it, where I was still practicing and stuff, but I go to play and like my heart just isn't in it.
Yeah.
And if I'm not like there really going for it, I just kind of start falling apart, like suddenly I die quicker and I just don't feel great about it. And I'm like, I should just take a break. I should take a break. So yeah, I just went in a total opposite direction, playing with virtual cards at the moment.
I mean, sometimes you need to switch.
Yeah, yeah.
Especially if you still have that competitive itch.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So it's kind of been in between. What I've been really craving is a fighting game. So
well, we'll have that on Friday, my friend.
Yes. Well, Tuesday, I think. Tuesday.
No, is it Tuesday?
I think it is.
Let
me see here. Guilty Gear Strive release date.
I'm gonna be kind of sad if it is. I'm so busy this week.
Oh no, you're right. It's the 11th.
Okay.
It's Friday. I don't know how I got that in my head.
Okay.
Yeah, so we'll have that on Friday. That's actually good too, because I'm house sitting Monday through Thursday.
Yeah.
And I was a little sad where I was like, oh, am I just gonna drive home to like play Guilty Gear? Because I will. But now I don't have to worry about it.
Right.
So yeah, I've been just kind of craving a new fighting game. And I've been playing Rose and Street Fighter V just a little bit here and there, which has kind of been scratching that itch. And then we've been playing a little bit of 98, which has been scratching that itch. But after the new KOF is being delayed, yeah, Guilty Gear's like the one on the horizon.
Exactly.
But yeah, so in the meantime, without anything super new and fresh to dive into, yeah, mostly just playing cards.
Nice.
Yeah. What about you, man? What have you been getting into?
Well, the majority of what I'm doing is Mass Effect. The second I got the Legendary Edition, that's all I've done is play Mass Effect. I am a huge fan.
Did you start on the first one or the second one, or?
So here's my history with Mass Effect. So I started with the second game when it came out on PS3, and I just fell in love with it. And then I got a gaming PC shortly thereafter, and I replayed Mass Effect 2 all the way through and did much better my second time. But I also got to play it, in much higher fidelity on a nice graphics card, and stuff, way back in 2011.
Yeah.
And then, so then I played through 3, and I tried playing through 1 over and over and over again, both on console and PC, and it is just a mess.
Yeah.
When you're going from 2 back to 1, it's really hard to play. So when I got Legendary Edition, I'm like, all right, this is my one shot to play through Mass Effect 1. And I got about 5 hours in. And I mean, they overhauled so much of the game that I hated. Yeah. But the pacing is not great. The animations are really bad. There's just a bunch of stuff where I was just like, you know what? I already know the story. I'm just gonna do my comic book before Mass Effect 2, which lets you make all the main choices that affect 2's story.
Yeah.
And like comic book form, you get to make those decisions. So I did that and just started again fresh with Mass Effect 2. Spent about 30 hours there, got a perfect Paragon ending, but kept my entire squad alive throughout the suicide run.
Oh, okay.
And which is a big deal. That's like kind of your thing you need to do, is keep everyone alive throughout the suicide run at the end of the game. Really great end game. Mass Effect 2 is still one of my very favorite games of all time. It is just so good. And then I'm playing through Mass Effect 3 now, and about 15 hours in it, probably about halfway through. I'm a little sad that I started it when I did and didn't wait on it, because I recently, we can talk about this later because it rolls into our retro conversation we're having today, but I got a GameCube, and I bought a handful of games that I'm really excited to revisit that I haven't played in like 20 some odd years. And I'm like, oh, I just want to finish Mass Effect 3. I don't want to stop Mass Effect 3 because I'm so far in, and I don't want to stop my story or, kill my shepherd right now. So I'm like, So I'm trying not to rush through Mass Effect 3, but I'm also trying to rush through Mass Effect 3.
Yeah, I feel like that's almost a worthy podcast topic on itself, which is like, how do you pace yourself through games? Because if you
Yeah.
start playing an RPG, you just can't put it down for like a month while you dive into something
Right.
else. Like you kind of have to keep it going.
Yeah.
And same with like very difficult games. Like if you're working through a Dark Souls, like taking a month off to go gallivant down retro land means that when you come back, like you've lost all the parry timing and stuff, and can make it really hard to get back into.
Yeah. So
And
that's that. And then I got into, for like a day, Virtua Fighter 5 Ultimate Showdown.
Yeah.
And I am very glad that after playing it more and playing it online more, that the online is functional, but it's inconsistently functional. And I remember that, I think, from the PS3 release back in the day, and the 360 when it first got online, like 2007.
Mm-hmm.
It was playable online, but it definitely doesn't have the consistency to make it always enjoyable online.
Right. Yeah.
And with Strive coming out, I know you and Yanko are going to be into that and things like that. So it's like, well, I would rather much play a fighting game with my friends than play a fighting game that I've already played to death with a bunch of people online and not have that connection with you guys. So while I have enjoyed some Virtua Fighter here and there over the last week or so, it's less of a, I want to try to get back all my fame and glory with Akira and put all that energy into Strive. And thank God Strive is right there. So
and also nice that it was just released for free on PSN.
Right, exactly.
So you didn't have to pay $30 or whatever they were going to charge for it. Right. Yeah, it's too bad about that one. I feel like we all kind of called it, that it was probably going to be dead in the water, largely due to the netcode, and seems to more or less be the case. Like I've seen some other criticisms leveraged towards it with like it not having all of the customization and whatnot, which I'm like, kind of whatever. I personally would take the upgraded graphics and stuff over the customization myself.
I have to pay for the customization.
Oh, is that it too? Okay.
Yeah. So $10 DLC, you get like 2,000 customizable items, not nearly as much as was in Final Showdown, but 200 customizable items, or sorry, 2,000. You get every soundtrack for every single Virtua Fighter, and you can play all those different soundtracks in the game, which is kind of cool because I really like the soundtrack to 1 and 2.
Yeah.
You get access to all the Virtua Fighter 1 style models.
Okay, that all comes together for $10.
That all comes together for $10. I mean, you're getting a lot of cosmetic content, but it is cool if you're a Virtua Fighter fan. If you're not a Virtua Fighter fan, all of that will be meaningless to you.
Yeah, I feel like that's probably worth it. That's like both of us ponying up $5 for next time we hang out in person, and we can play Virtua Fighter and have all the fun stuff to mess around with.
Right, exactly. So I bought it. It was $10. I'm like, I'll give Sega my money for this. Like, I want to encourage this. I don't want to encourage delay-based netcode in 2021, but I want to encourage people playing Virtua Fighter. I want to encourage Sega to continue to revisit this series in the future.
Yeah.
And make sure that they realize that interest is there. So
nice.
Only way I can do that was with my money.
Right.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. And again, I mean, if we were to walk into an arcade, we would have just spent $5 playing Virtua Fighter if there was a cabinet anyway. So, well worth it.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Speaking of cabinets, how are your arcade cabinets?
So my big Dynamo HS5 has I don't know, it's not a brand new monitor, of course, but a nicely refurbished monitor by a local dude that lives up in Dayton. It looks amazing. I have been having an issue with the original monitor. I've replaced the chassis 3 times. And for those that don't know, like a monitor chassis is like the hardware, the guts that runs the picture and does everything. And the tube is what you refer to as the screen. And the tube had a horrible magnetic interference issue that I could not rectify. I mean, tons of forum posts and people trying to help and all sorts of advice. And I've tried every possible thing to get rid of this interference and couldn't happen. And it just kept getting worse. And it was a problem with something with the tube. So Dude had an entire tube, chassis, everything. That the exact model that I needed. He had just refurbished it, and it is fantastic. Nice, bright, crystal clear picture with no interference. So
CRTs, man, they're so nice, so nice. Like it's so funny because back in the day, CRTs were kind of like the old technology, and I found them to be heavy, cumbersome, not that great.
Right.
And then once flat screen TVs with higher resolutions came out, there was an immediate appeal, and CRTs seemed so clunky. But then as you know, TVs continue to progress and input lag and color kind of distortions became more of a norm as all of the post-processing kind of got in its own way. To go back and play like on a big blue cab with a CRT monitor just feels awesome. And there's just nothing
really does,
like real scan lines are just you just can't quite replicate them. They're just not the same. Yeah.
There's also no motion blur. Like when you're moving, movements, like everything is just so crisp. Every single frame of animation, you can see every single frame. Like it's just there's just a crispness to playing on a CRT. Now, after I've gone through the shitter with my Neo Candy Cab, and it is still in the shitter right now.
Oh gosh. Yeah.
I won't even start to get into that now. I am pretty well done with CRTs for the foreseeable future. I am sick of having things to try to fix. So I have two cabs that work fantastically, and I have a beautiful Neo Candy Cab that I don't know if I'll be able to get the things that I need to try to fix it.
Dang. Yeah. So that's the hard thing with like, you know, retro technology is that there's a real cost of upkeep that, you know, just isn't the case anymore, and that's just going to continue. And I think especially when it comes to like cartridge-based systems, I feel like they're going to be more reliable and maybe even sought after, or people are just going to kind of hunker down with their collections on cartridge-based stuff because they're going to last the test of time a little bit more. I feel like especially early like 1-2 disc speed systems like the PlayStation, Neo CD and stuff, like you have those like, you know, it was the first iterations of adding, you know, a CD-ROM drive to a system. So the CD-ROMs themselves were pretty fresh and weren't super refined, you know.
Right.
And you're probably just going to run into lens problems, you know, as it moves up and down the track, where you just have these small pieces of plastic that are just going to degrade over time, as well as the actual glass pieces itself or the plastic piece, you know, just more moving parts and whatnot to go wrong.
So there's workarounds for all of that now, all of it.
Yeah.
But all of those workarounds don't include having the physical game. So you can get like SD card replacements for CD-ROM drives and a Saturn and a PlayStation and a Dreamcast and a Neo CD, where you put all the ISOs on there and then you just run it, and it just runs it on real hardware. But it's kind of like an EverDrive for a CD system.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is really great. It's really cool. But at the same time, it typically just destroys the CD drive and you don't have an opportunity to use these discs. So, but even though that solution, because the lenses are for these old systems, you know, especially the PC Engine Duo, the Sega CD, that have bad capacitors on top of bad lenses and things like that.
Yeah.
But you still have tons of value in these games, in these physical games, which is starting to be weird in the market because less and less people are using those games to play them. They're playing them on these SD solutions, but they still want these physical games. And me, as a person that only collects games that I'm going to play, I'm like, why are you wasting your money? If you're just going to have that sitting on your shelf, what's it for? What are you going to use that for? Not even five, the one person that's ever going to come over to your house and be like, look, you got a Saturn copy of Bomberman. Oh my God, that's the coolest shit I've ever seen. Who's going to do that? I mean, if it's just for you, that's cool. I mean, I get it. You know, all the stuff I have is just for me too. but at the same time, I enjoy the ritual. I've talked about this before. I enjoy the ritual of playing the physical game media. You know, the opening it up, looking at the art, experiencing it, putting it in the console. There is a real ritual there for me that I really cherish. Not everybody has that, but then they still want the thing, and so that's just like my own, like, I guess, bias, you know, kind of in there. Like, I don't understand why you would still want the physical thing if you're never going to use the physical thing for what it's intended
Yeah,
for. But I'm a very
right.
practical person. Not everyone is, and that's okay. But yeah, it's weird.
Yeah, it's this overlap of like mentalities where you
Yeah,
have people that just want the pure experience, and they just are happy to change up the hardware, slap it in an SD card, just to make sure though that it's running on the original hardware,
exactly.
and that's pure. And then people that are just into the collecting delicate things and setting them aside, and they just like to be little spinsters over their collection and
Yeah.
admire them and whatnot, but maybe not play them much. And then there's people in the middle like you that are all about the more experiential side of things.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and it's interesting because I think there's a lot of different philosophies at play too, and it's not all clear. Like when it comes to original hardware, I often think of. Do you remember the metaphor story? I think it was called the Ship of Theseus, and it's like this guy had this ship. It goes out to sea. It's this fantastic boat. And when it comes back, it has to have some repairs done. So, they maybe remove some of the planks and they nail down some new ones. And over the course of 100 years, at the end of the 100 years, everything has been replaced.
Right.
And it's like, well, is it still the Ship of Theseus? Like, is it the idea and the collection of the thing that makes the authenticity, or is it the actual physical molecules being in place, if you want to go down to that level? And yeah, I think like when you start swapping out the CD-ROM for an SD reader, and you start adding in mods for the video out and stuff, like you get into that territory of like you're kind of balancing in between. And I think in some ways you're there. I think you still cleanly straddle the two, though. You tend to have original systems, and you might use like an upscaler to use them on a new TV and stuff. But like you said, the ritual for actually putting the game in and experiencing the actual packaging and right down to the weight of the cartridge as it clicks in is all really important.
Feels good.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what we want to experience with retro games.
Yeah.
Like it's too bad because I think a lot of people, they start to dip their toe in retro games, and that means that they download an emulator, and maybe they end up with this pack of 20,000 ROMs, and they boot a couple up and it loads in a little crappy window, and they play with their keyboard and they're like, yeah, this isn't what I remember. It's the game, but this is so much crappier than I remember.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, like it can be good. Like you just have to put in a little bit more time to make it come together,
Yeah, for sure.
So what is retro?
What is retro?
Yeah, I was thinking about this the other day, and retro means something to me. Like I personally, for me, if it flashes kind of a moment in childhood, like the 8 to 16-bit is most firmly retro for me. Retro with a capital R, like that's the label for me. And even when I was growing up, like the early Atari 2600 stuff was probably retro at that time, even. Even if it was just newer or older. But nowadays, I mean, dang man, is PS3 retro? Is PS4 retro?
I mean, this is a very valid question, and I think that's really in the eye of the beholder. Like, there's no like a book on video game collecting on what is considered retro.
Yeah.
Pat Country, I think is how you say his name. Pat the NES Punk. He has his like weekly podcast, and I watch snippets of those here and there. And they were talking about that one day on what is considered retro right now. And I don't think that we yet, as a collective community, consider the HD era. So PS3, 360, like 2005 on, that's not quite retro. What is
Yeah.
considered retro right now is anything that's like 20 some odd years. So PS2, GameCube, Xbox era is now considered retro, like
Yeah.
true retro. Um, but I mean, another word that drives me crazy is classic. So I remember seeing an ad from maybe like 1981 that was for, you know, like I think it was an Atari ad with a few like arcade conversions that had come over to Atari, and it was like, play these arcade classics that were 2 years old. And I'm like, are they really classics by that point?
Yeah.
And I guess it's just in the eye of the beholder, you know.
Right, because in classic is another word where just being from an era doesn't make something classic. Like a classic car is one that kind of stood the test of time. There's something about its design or iconography or whatever that like kept it around.
2 years in, can you really tell that? I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like that's a stretch. Like somebody in marketing was just like, how do we rebrand this a little bit?
What?
Yeah.
How do you know they're a classic? You don't even know what the fuck you're writing about.
Right. Yeah. Featuring that's classic gameplay that you love. Like, what?
there's a queer rapper, Coswell. I think he's hysterical. He's like, say if you took like the edge that Eminem has, but you make it, I don't know, more flamboyant with a really biting humor to it. Like everything has a really biting humor to it. There's nothing serious about it. And one song, one of his lines is, "You're a trend about to end. I'm classic." And I'm like, what a cool line. That's classic. Like something that's not trendy, something that you said stands the test of time, you know, something that's not gonna fall out of style just because it's old.
Yeah. What do you think about like the total ground up recreation of retro consoles now? Like why am I blanking on the
analog stuff?
The analog. Yeah. Because I feel like they hit the scene, how long ago was it that their first thing was their
2014, 2015 maybe?
And was that the Walnut like AES console? Was that the first thing that they put out? That was them, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I think that was like them just kind of getting their feet in the water.
Let's see if there's anything on our friend Wikipedia's.
Because to my knowledge, I can't really think of any other times where a company set out to recreate a retro console.
2011. They've been in
2011?
business. Yeah.
Okay, so about 10 years.
10 years. Yes, and 2011 is when they did that wooden MVS.
Yeah. Who would have known? I mean, I remember seeing the MBS and being like, wow, that is just gorgeous and it's beautiful and it's cool. I never thought that they were going to move on to bring FPGA into like consumer hands and whatnot.
Yeah.
They really,
it's nuts.
Yeah, they became pioneers in that sense. Because before that, we did have mostly like knockoff consoles. Like, you know, during the 32-bit era, you could suddenly find these like Russian Nintendos or Brazilian ones that were just packed full of ROMs and stuff. But that's not the same as, you know, bringing back a retro console. That's just sloppy piracy that's just filling in a blank where they think people will buy stuff. And will. It's not the same as setting out to, you know, create a one-for-one retro console that now has like modern sensibilities built into it.
And that's what I like about what analog is doing. There are some corners, dark corners of the internet where people really don't like analog. There's some peeps on the Neo forums that just hate analog for one reason or another. Whether it's valid, I don't really care, because I love what they are doing. Because like you said, they're taking these retro concepts and they're I mean, really, if you get down to it, FPGA is just another form of emulation. It's not emulating the hardware through software. It's emulating the hardware through hardware. It's not the original chipset. You know, it's and it still has some inaccuracies or room for inaccuracies. Even if it's cycle accurate, it's still not perfect.
Yeah.
It's really close, but it's still not perfect. That's why there's all these different cores that come out and core updates, when they find incompatibilities with games and things like that. So, I mean, at the end of the day, it's just another emulation solution to me, but it's an emulation solution that I like because it allows me to interact with it in a way that I would interact with a classic console without really sacrificing a lot of the quality, like a lot of the other clone consoles out there sacrifice quality. I need something to be cycle accurate. I play these games a lot. If I pop in Mega Man 2, I need to be able to play Mega Man 2 by the frame.
Yeah.
That's how good I am at that game. And I can do that on analog consoles. I can do that on the Retro USB AVS, which is their FPGA NES solution. I can't do that on a lot of other clone consoles or emulation solutions. I can't play that perfect game of Mega Man 2, but I can there. And that's what's important for me. And I get to put the cartridge in and it makes me happy.
Right. Yeah. Because I have a like Mr. setup, which is just a small little board that runs it's an FPGA board, field programmable gate array. And I just got it loaded up with everything that I'm interested in terms of playing retro stuff. And what I like about it is, like you said, it's 99.9% perfect. And in playing it, especially with games that I'm super familiar with, playing it just through emulation, it does feel off. Even if I can't actually pick out specifically all of the things that are off, like maybe the transparency isn't working quite right. Maybe the in-game clock is a little bit off. Maybe there's flickering where there normally would or wouldn't be, and so forth. But having become so familiar with the game, there's this like unease when playing it emulated. You're like, gosh, it just feels not quite there. It's almost like watching a pirated movie or something where you're like, yeah, you can actually see the black separation of colors where the codec didn't compress it super well.
Right.
And even if I'm not totally going through it with a fine-tooth comb, it just feels off because there's parts of it that are registering in some part of my brain. With FPGA, it really feels pretty much perfect. And I feel like when you become kind of a connoisseur, especially with like retro games, and it becomes, it's for me, it's like if I were into jewelry and diamonds, I might not be able to tell the difference between a real diamond and a cubic zirconium. But if I really appreciate diamonds and appreciate how they're made and the history of them, I would be willing to pay for the authenticity of a real diamond, because it's meaningful at that point.
Sure.
And I feel like that's kind of this divider with retro consoles as well. Like if you're really into, the authenticity of it, you probably want to get something that, plays it perfectly, or of course go whole hog and track down the originals, and play it that way.
Yeah, which is very viable in today's market, but you have to have a little bit of expendable income in order to play true retro consoles in today's market, because you have to have the console. If you want to run it on a CRT, you got to buy a CRT. They're bulky. No one has room for them anymore. They're heavy. They break all the time. I'm not saying don't buy a CRT, but like everyone has a hard on right now for those Sony PVMs, those commercial grade little amazing little CRTs.
Yeah. Are those the ones that you usually found in like TV studios?
Yeah.
They were like monitors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, they get a great picture. They have SCART hookups. I mean, there's all sorts of great reasons to own one. And they're probably the ones that last the longest really out of anything.
Yeah.
But they're usually pretty tiny, like no more than, 19, 20 inches, I think is as big as they got. That's what she said. And to me, like, I'm going to be like, I want to chill on my couch and play my video games. I've always been that way. And I can do that on a 50-inch screen. I'm going to do that on a 50-inch screen. Like, I'm not a CRT purist. I love my arcade cabs. I love playing on a CRT. I get the appeal 100%. But for how I play games and how I like to relax when I play games, things like that, I don't want to sit, really close to a 19-inch screen trying to see my shit. I don't have the setup for that, nor do I want the setup for that. So anyway, But to hook up these consoles to modern displays, you have to have another intermediary device, which range in quality, big range in quality, and a big range in price. I mean, you can spend $100 on a RetroTink 2X Pro to convert like component video and composite video and S video to HDMI out, but it caps at 480p. So you're going to get a nice crisp image, especially if your modern display has a good upscaler itself. If it doesn't, it could look like shit. It just depends on how much money you're willing to fork out for a nice display that has low input lag and a good upscaler on top of that. Or you can spend a whole lot of money and you can get what's called a Framemeister, which will upscale your image to like 1080p, but it adds about 1.5 frames of input lag, which is okay for some people. It's not okay for other people, but then they stop making it. So it's like $600 if you find it. It's just there's so many options out there. So if you're getting into retro gaming, I mean, it's a lot more than just grabbing your NES and hooking up the composite to, I don't know why modern TVs still have a composite hookup, but plugging that thing in, and then it's just a huge muddy mess. And you're like, this looks like shit. I don't remember it looking this bad. Well, it didn't. You're right. It didn't look that bad. You're not remembering it incorrectly. It's just, this is going to look horrible because the TV can't do that, you know? So it's almost worth, like, say if somebody's talking to me about getting into retro games and I spent oodles of money on my setup and things like that, and I own it and I love it, but I love to tinker with stuff like that. Most people, I would be like, get a clone console or get a Mister.
Much
Honestly,
easier road.
Because unless there's a real appeal to collect the things that you love and to be involved, from my perspective, to be involved with the ritual of physical video games and using those physical video games, like people have, you know, this thing right now for LPs, records. This huge resurgence, and oh man, it's analog audio and orgasms, and it's like, okay, go get your record. I'm not that person. I still use MP3s, but I use Winamp, so I'm still old school with it.
You are.
But but I mean, you know, everybody collects things for a reason. But when it comes to retro games, it's so expensive to get a good system up and running. You're going to waste a lot of money trying to find the right middle solution that works for you and what you want out of your setup. It's a lot of trial and error and a lot of money for that trial and error. And it might not be worth it for a lot of people, especially people with kids that have, you know, a lot more expenses than I do, you know? So,
yeah, I think like a good question for anybody before they go down that road is, you know, do you enjoy pursuing that challenge of getting everything dialed in and set up? Like, do you enjoy reading up on forums and through spec sheets and understanding not just like how the technology is working, but like what it's actually doing, so you can understand all the interactions of an upscaler, and kind of tuning everything? Like, there's some people that just want to buy a sports car that's all set up and ready to go, and then there's other people that want to buy, you know, an old, you know, Japanese Honda Civic, and they want to do all of the engineering themselves, you know, and like figure out what side of that you're on. Because if you want to really pursue retro consoles, like you now these days have to be into the tinkering side. There's just no escaping it anymore, which is crazy. I wouldn't have expected that to be like a barrier, a gate of entry for getting into retro consoles. If you would have asked me, you know, 20 years ago, I would have just thought like, oh, you just buy the console and those are probably going to get harder to find and more expensive, and you have to worry about them breaking and there's scarcity. But other than that, that's about it. I would have never anticipated that just getting it working on, you know, a modern display would introduce, you know, 5 different variables that have to be accounted for.
Yeah.
True. Yeah.
I mean, outside of the consoles, like my analog consoles that I can plug directly into HDMI, and then a couple other consoles that I have modded for HDMI. I'll get to that in a minute. I have 2 retro tinks. another device called an OSSC, which stands for Open Source Scan Converter, which is basically another line doubler. So it takes your maybe 240p image, will line double it to 480p, so it looks, you know, better and more crisp coming out.
Yeah.
It can also do more than that, and it has a SCART input, you know, things like that, which is why I have that. And I have my super gun running through the OSSC and one other retro ting for sound. I mean, there's
Jeez.
everybody's thing is going to be so highly customized
Yeah.
how they want it set up for what they have to work with and the amount of money that they have to spend.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, yeah. That's a lot of money.
It's funny. We used to, you know, like kind of make jokes about the Leaning Tower of Babel on the Sega Genesis, as it had the 32X plugged into, you know, the XYZ, blah, blah, blah. And you ended up with this giant tower. And like, in a funny way, that's still what we're doing. We still have, you know, this little centipede of connections just to get everything up and working right. But it's so awesome, and it's so worth it though, like for nerds like us that grew up with this stuff, that were passionate about it back in the day, like probably crazy obsessed, honestly, and now have you know, grown into 4.0 adults that are still crazy passionate about gaming, and have this real appreciation for retro games and for what they are. Which makes me wonder, like why should somebody play retro games? You know, like if a 20 something was just like, hey, why should I bother? And like, I would imagine their first kind of like, I don't know if I want to bother, is they would probably assume that the games themselves are just, you know, clunky, inferior takes on what modern gaming now does. Like why play Battle of the Olympus on the NES when you could play God of War? Like, don't they deal with the same themes? Aren't they kind of approaching the same ideas? And to me, one of the first things that comes to mind, of course, is like the lineage and the history, that like, oh, it's so important to see these concepts as they were, you know, being figured out in the early games as they built up, and you can understand the trajectory and how we got here today. But I don't think that's actually a very satisfying answer to a young person. That's kind of like telling them to appreciate, you know, the Battle of the Alamo because you want to understand, you know, what San Antonio looks like today. Like, nobody cares. Only real nerds care about that stuff. But I think that there really is an argument for playing retro games, that the games themselves stand the test of time. And maybe a more apt analogy is it's kind of like reading, you know, maybe, I don't know, some book from 100 years ago that, you know, is now an old tomb compared to whatever new stuff is out, but it still holds up. Like it really is a complete product, you know, like, yeah. I'm trying to think, I don't know, what would you say to that 20 something, you know, to make a case for like, it's worth checking out retro?
If I'm talking to an art student, that's the bend I would take is, you know, experience art. I mean, experience what it was like, you know, see the beginnings, but see how it has, games have grown into what they are today. But a lot of experiences back then are definitely do still hold up. The core experience of a video game, a game, is strong. So you take a game like chess, you could take a game like Go, checkers, a Clue, Monopoly, now, you know, that have been around for 60, 70 years more. Backgammon, all of these games are old, but the core of the game works so well that anyone from any era of any age can pick it up and enjoy it. And I think video games, because they are a game, have some of those same qualities, right? And no matter how far removed we get from 2D side-scrolling games as the triple A of an era, which was back in the 80s and 90s, more in the 90s, I think, than even the 80s. But the more we move away from that time where that was our AAA game, you still see so many of those game design choices and what we learned as an industry, as an art form during that time in games today. progression systems, checkpoint systems, things like that were all pioneered during that time, where even somebody playing a game today can go back and they can instantly recognize and interact with those interaction points and immediately understand what they are.
Yeah.
So I think video games as a game, they certainly do hold up. Graphically is where people kind of have a problem with that. And I don't have a lot of evidence, of course. I would love to be like some sort of academic about video games, where you're like, a lot of shit about video games. Let's put you in this university and here's some research money and actually like do some studies on this stuff.
That'd be nice.
Love that. That'd be amazing. But anyway, graphics can hold people from the modern day up a little bit. And I've noticed this with people like friends that I have and stuff that either have kids of their own or have nieces and nephews that interact with these things. So my friend Shane, he lives with his sister, and one of her stepkids saw that I had gotten Shane a copy of Mega Man 11 for his Switch for his birthday one year. And he really wanted to play it. And so he asked Shane if he could borrow his Switch to play Mega Man 11. And Shane's like, oh, yeah, here. But you should try the older Mega Man games. They're all really good. And he's like, I can't. I won't do it. They just look too old. So Mega Man 11 it's a classic Mega Man game. There's some design decisions. I have my own qualms with it. It's a fine game, though. And it plays like a classic Mega Man game. All the tools are there. It's not radically different from 8-bit Mega Man. It just looks modern. Or it doesn't look blocky. It doesn't, sound like chip tunes. And younger folks these days aren't equipped to appreciate that the way that we were, because that's what we grew up with. And even people that might be like 25, 30, 10, 15 years younger than us might be able to still appreciate that because they probably had a Sega Genesis or an NES lying around that their older siblings had at that time, So, but these younger kids, 20 and younger, they're not going to have that. They're not going to have the same level of appreciation unless there's something about it that tickles them and they become a nerd about it. Kind of like you were saying.
And because we're never able to see and experience like 2D graphics without the lens of our experience as kids and the lens of nostalgia. And like when I see anything 2D, I get excited. If it has chunky little pixels, I'm more into it.
Totally, me too.
In most cases, most modern like retro remakes that go for the more sleek kind of 3D graphics, I find them kind of lifeless. I find them kind of just whatever. I'm not. It doesn't do anything for me. But when they do stick with like traditional, like that 16-bit style or whatnot, like I love it. I think it's freaking awesome. And yeah, I could imagine not being into it. Like, well, I guess that's the problem is I can't quite imagine it. Like I'm trying to put my head in that, 18-year-old person who's playing a Mega Man game for the first time. And they're like, oh my God, look at this garbage.
Right.
Like to them, does it just look like Atari, like combat? Like it's just fat blocks just moving around,
Probably.
Yeah.
I don't understand that perspective.
I just can't.
I can't imagine that.
Right.
What I have found is that the people, and especially the younger kids that I've talked to that find 8-bit and older off-putting, they can deal with 16-bit and that arcade era of 2D, but they can't deal with the blocky 3D. So like during the 32-bit era when, 2D fighting games and things like that in the arcade were still big, you could throw in Street Fighter, X-Men versus whatever, any Marvel versus game, and a good-looking SNK game. Throw in any of that stuff from like 1995 on, and they're like, "This looks awesome. This looks like a cartoon." There was just a jump in what we experienced in 2D. I think 2D really hit a plateau then, reached its height in the mid to late 90s. And so you can go back to 2D games. Older, younger folks today can go back to 2D games from the mid to late 90s, even a lot of 16-bit stuff, and be totally fine with it. But before that, it's too old. It's it's like old Hollywood, like 1930s old to them. Like
Yeah.
how we would picture silent film is how they picture like the 2, 4, and 8-bit eras.
Yeah, yeah, just crazy.
It's
But
it's just
yep,
too old for
that's
them to jive with. Yeah.
yeah. So what are you most excited for with retro stuff, like in the next couple of years? Like, is there anything that you want to happen or anything that you personally are just looking forward to getting into, or anything that you're just curious about how it's going to pan out?
I mean, honestly, I have everything I want. I have every console that I want to collect for. I mean, yeah, I still have games that I buy every once in a while, but
Yeah.
when it comes down to it, there's nothing that I'm looking forward to adding really to the archive. Um, what what I'm most interested in, and what I continue to watch, is the market.
Mm-hmm.
Whether or not I want to buy something, I'm always looking at the market. I think it's fascinating.
Yeah.
What makes the market fluctuate, what makes certain market segments go wild, what makes certain market segments plummet. A really great modern example that's just happened over the last like 6 months is the Nintendo GameCube. Out of nowhere, prices for US games have skyrocketed 60 to 70%.
What?
Games that you could
This is
get
news
that
to me.
were 20, $30 like 6 months ago, you're
Yeah.
paying about 70, sometimes over 50% or more, a 70, 80, 90, some are over $300 at this point. A really great example of this is Metal Gear Solid, the Twin Stakes, the Metal Gear
Right.
Solid
I
remake.
had that one. Yeah, I remember
Yeah.
that.
It's actually the only version of Metal Gear Solid I've beaten, and I
It's a good
like
one.
it more than the original.
Yeah.
Kojima would kill me for that. But anyway,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, you could get that just a few months ago for at the max $40, and it was in mint condition.
Yeah. Yeah.
$120 now.
Oh my gosh.
Just like the pandemic made the retro game market explode again. It had a huge
Yeah.
explosion around 2016, but it made it explode again.
Wow.
And yeah, people are just eating up this GameCube stuff more than PS2, more than Dreamcast right now. Dreamcast has always been a little niche thing anyway, and certainly more than Xbox, but more than even the PS2, which was the thing of the era.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of like analysts are like, what in the world made people get so into GameCube? I've been wanting a GameCube for a while, but I was just like, I'll just get it later. I'll just get it later. This shit's so cheap.
Yeah. Caught up.
It did. So I finally got my GameCube, but then I found out, because I do most of my games import, I found out that the market spike has not hit Japan yet.
Oh, okay. So you can kind of get ahead of it there.
So I did.
Nice.
So I got all the games that I want. I spent like, $300 or whatever, but I got like 15 games.
Damn, nice.
For $300. If I would got those 15 games, all the US versions, it would have been close to $1,000.
Whew. That is so crazy. I wonder, because for a while, like the N64, I remember when all of a sudden that was just popping up in Reddit all the time. There was a lot of nostalgia for it. And I wasn't paying attention to the market, but I had a feeling like the prices on it were just steadily increasing. Like, I wonder if it's almost just kind of like a gap of like 15 years. And then as we move forward, things on the back of the gap, moved from Super Nintendo to all of a sudden N64 is where all the market motion is happening, and now it's moved up to the GameCube, and
that happens somewhat. So the most popular market segment is anything Nintendo. Nintendo stuff is going to hold its value more than any other console. If it was on a Nintendo console, there's some sort of value there for you as a collector, and it's going to hold its value a little bit more. But then there are other like niche things like the Neo Geo. Of course, I'm glad I got back in when I got back in, because the market again bubbled last year, and has been continuing to bubble in a lot of those segments. But yeah, typically that happens though. Like as people get older, you will see the mid 20s to mid 30s, whatever was popular during that time when they were kids and teenagers, is what's going to hold the largest amount of the growing market segment. So right now it's the GameCube, PS2, Xbox era is seeing the most growth, but for some reason the GameCube right now is being favored over everything else.
So
just in the US.
Yeah, yeah. What I like about it, though, and one of the things that I'm most excited about myself, is, well, I should first say that one of the problems, I think, like I mentioned earlier with getting into retro stuff, is it's really easy to make the accident of giving yourself too much to choose from. You just download a giant file of ROMs, and it's just, I forget the name for that in sociology, but basically where you introduce more choice and you end up with more disappointment, less joy. It's much better to have just a few things, a curated collection, and to go from. And like, that's the thing that I am most excited about with retro stuff. And I feel like you've been really a big part of pushing that in the last couple of years, as you got me into FPGA. And we started going back and forth and often giving ourselves kind of like little retro assignments where you're like, all of a sudden you're playing like Life Force or Salamander and you're like, hey, check this out, man, you should revisit this one. Or we get on this shmup kick in general and we start just kind of oscillating through different games. And having a little bit of direction on that to say like, okay, I want to get into this genre of retro games, or I want to try out these 2 or 3 in particular. I get so much more joy out of that. And I'm having just a lot more fun approaching games like that and making little mini missions out of it, whether to try to beat it in, 8 credits or something like that. And I feel like this is something that's just not talked about a whole lot. There's not a whole lot of articles about it. Like there's, the pitfalls of having too much choice, but there's not a whole lot about how to make it work for you. Like having a gaming buddy to, trade titles back and forth, or to just go after a particular genre or a subset or just a particular system and, working through the library with that more curious kind of observational mindset. But all of that is what I'm most looking forward to. Like in this next year, I know there's plenty of good stuff on the horizon that is new and coming out, but I am just as legit excited about the retro things that I haven't gone back to and rediscovered. Like I had so much fun, especially with the FPGA, going back and playing through old like Sega Genesis stuff.
Didn't I get you to beat Rocket Knight?
Totally. Yeah. You got me
an awesome game.
It is. It's fantastic. You got me on Rocket Knight. And then all of a sudden I was going down this Thunder Force kind of path. And then pretty soon I'm listening to like Genesis, like Mega Drive soundtracks. And just thinking back about how like at the time, these soundtracks, I didn't like the synth quality of them, but it really grew on me. And it has teeth to it that I really came to like. That part of getting into retro gaming, where you kind of rebloom your interests in hindsight in a way by revisiting them, that I am so excited for. Like I'm in particular really excited to get more into the TurboGrafx library and revisit a lot of like their shooters and stuff. And like GameCube, that's another example. There's so much stuff on the GameCube that like just kind of passed me by. And I know it's just waiting for me, but not to consume like a vacuum cleaner, but to take my time, pick and choose, and relish those moments. Which again, why I think everybody should have a gamer buddy. Like it just adds so much more to it when you have another mind to bounce ideas off and compare and contrast stuff.
I guess I do have a few things I'm looking forward to, especially with the GameCube. Because I grabbed a good chunk of games that I just needed to have. Like F-Zero GX is still my favorite racing game ever.
I'd love to play
planet.
That.
And I've never been able to really enjoy GameCube emulation. There's always like 1 or 2 little things that drive me crazy. Like playing F-Zero GX in 4K is really awesome. I'm not going to say it's not awesome, but I've never been able to get a good controller configuration that mimics what I could do on the GameCube controller with that game. And I'm always like, oh shit, the Z button's in a weird place, or I can't do the bump along with the turn and blah, blah, blah. And this, because the game was so designed around the GameCube controller, same with the Metroid Prime games.
That controller being so unique.
Right.
Yeah.
And I plug it in and I have an HDMI thing. So the HDMI mod on my system goes right into the digital video signal. So it's not converting anything to analog and then back to digital.
Cool.
It's the true digital feed. And because most GameCube games run in progressive scan or 480p, and my TV has a great upscaler, everything is really crisp. It looks fantastic. It really does. And even F-Zero runs in widescreen natively. Did you know that?
No, didn't.
Yeah,
that's cool.
And Star Fox Adventures. Anyway, sidebar.
Nice.
But outside of those games that I got that I just need in my collection, there's a few that I've gotten that I've never played before, like Tales of Symphonia. I hear it's like the best Tales game, and everyone likes the GameCube version because the GameCube version, oddly enough, is the only version of the game that runs at 60 frames per second. And even the PC version is capped at 30, and you can't do it because it'll and you can't up it or it'll break the game. So I got the GameCube version of that, to try. So there's a few fun things I'm really looking to diving into that I've never played before, and some fresh experiences along with all my old favorites.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah.
Well, my friend, I think that's just about another hour here.
It has been. This
has been a fun rethinking of just retro stuff in general
for another 3 hours on
same.
all of this and the market and my experience, and maybe we'll have to do like a part 2 or something. I think there's a lot to this.
We could totally do that. Maybe pick out, just off the top of my head, some of the best retro experiences of the last year, and kind of go from there.
And I would really like to, in a future episode, I think maybe if anybody might be watching this would enjoy a little bit about me getting back into the Neo Geo. I would like to talk a little bit about my Neo Geo history of, everything I went through and then getting back into it over the last 3 years, and kind of what that looks like from that collector market segment. People are usually really interested in that, and I have a lot to share. All my thoughts are already on my website. So if anybody wants to go to www.bulkenginesroom.net, I will put a link in the description. Check it out. There's lots of reviews. And if you're looking into getting into the Neo, there's lots and lots of articles about, if you're this type of gamer, go after this console. If you're, looking to save money, maybe, go towards the Neo CD or the NVS route. And here's why, and here's what to look out for bootlegs. There's lots of information on there. I have worked tirelessly to put all that out there so people could learn as I was learning. And I think there's a lot of good stuff. So if you're looking to get into the Neo, check out my website, and maybe we'll do an episode about it in the future.
For sure. Link in the doobly-doo.
Yeah, the doobly-doo. Yeah. Thank you, PBS Idea Channel. I think Mike Rugnetta was the guy that did the doobly-doo thing originally.
Totally. Yeah.
I miss him. That was a good show.
Me too. I was just thinking about that the other day. That was probably some of the best video essays on YouTube.
Shit, that's what got me into watching YouTube as frequently as I do, is that show.
So good. So good. Now I want to go back and watch them.
Right?
Yeah. All right, man. Let's call it a day then.
All right. We'll do it. Everybody, we'll see you soon.
Adios.